What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome. And our show is finally live. We had a little bit of a delay getting things set up here. We're still thrashing around getting everything ready. But it is Friday, October 27th, 2017, the end of the week. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. And again, we're dealing with tech issues and all these other problems. So we're a little bit late starting the show, but we are live. We are not a replay. Please don't tune us off and go listen to somebody else at this point. All right, so getting into the news here. First of all, a reminder that the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 of the show today. On November 1st, Don Wiskin of Extendovite is going to be our guest talking about his recent difficulties with the Canadian authorities over his product, which he's prevailed, but it's still an annoyance here. And the phone lines are now open, 800-313-9443. So getting on to the big story, and we're going to keep this the big story. Uranium One, the PP dossier, all of that stuff. That is the hot story on the independent media, and it is the absolute opposite on the corporate media. They are trying to make this go away. So what we have here basically is the entire Democratic Party establishment sold its soul and lost the election. This thing has spread way beyond Hillary Clinton or the Clinton Foundation. A lot of people are dirty with this, including people who are unfortunately still in positions of power and authority. This thing spreads everywhere. And I want you to step back for a minute and just think about it. 30 years ago, middle of the 1980s, you had the Clintons were ruling Arkansas, and the CIA was using Arkansas as the northern end of a gun and drug running pipeline. And there was huge amounts of cocaine coming in, and everybody had lots and lots of money to play around with. And after 30 years, how far has that corruption spread? How much of the Clintons' constituency are tangled up in that flow of drug money? How many businesses were started with laundered drug money? And are they going to be close friends with the Clintons? So this thing, the more and more we look at it, the more and more we realize it is way beyond just Bill and Hillary. It is a huge chunk of Washington, D.C. They're all dirty with this. Now, this Uranium One informant that has just been cleared to testify before Congress apparently has video evidence of Russian efforts to bribe the Clintons specifically. And of course, CNN is now out there saying, well, Donald Trump got the gag order lifted. He's got that right as the president. They're trying to make it look like it's a vendetta, that it's a hatchet job. Gee, you want to talk about hatchet job? Look at that whole Trump-Russia collusion that they've been pounding on us month after month after month after month. And it turns out the only person not colluding with Russia was Donald Trump. So he's going to be testifying now before Congress, and all, the corporate media, the legacy media, they're all circling the wagons. Newsweek is out there saying there's nothing to any of this. Forbes is saying, look, we looked at this back in last year's election. We didn't find anything. USA Today, same thing. It's a lot of nothing. Even Snopes has gone out and done a page on this Uranium One deal saying it's completely false. It's completely bogus. Now, the reason here is very, very obvious. If the Clinton crimes start to unwind, it is going to unwind all the way back to that CIA gun and drug running in 1980s Arkansas under then-Governor Bill Clinton. So the CIA now is trying to protect itself. At this point, I don't think they care all that much about the Clintons. But they do care about keeping the American people from learning what has really been going on. And I think that's why the corporate media, which is all under the control of Operation Mockingbird, has been given their marching orders. You will make this go away. And, of course, the harder they try to make it go away, the more people turn to the independent media, because people understand there is something really serious here. This is the biggest scandal in U.S. history, and it does deserve to be aired. It does deserve to be made public. And by golly, we here in the independent media, that's what we're going to do. Now, Paul Ryan says the FBI has now agreed to turn over long-sought documents regarding the Trump dossier. The FBI was stalling, and it was getting to be a real tiff between him and Paul Ryan, but all of a sudden the FBI says they will turn it over. So we may be seeing the beginnings of various limited hangouts. And for those of you who don't understand the term of craft, a limited hangout is where you will release information or admit guilt to a minor crime in order to conceal a much greater crime behind it. A good example would be Bill Clinton admitting to sex with Monica Lewinsky in order to keep the Whitewater investigation away from that gun and drug running that was going on out of Arkansas when he was governor. That's a limited hangout. Apparently, this Fusion GPS agreed to identify the payment trail back to the DNC and the Clinton campaign in order to avoid a congressional subpoena of all their bank records, because apparently there's something even worse hidden in there. And it doesn't look like it's going to work. Congress is still saying they want to see all the records. Everybody is alerted. Everybody is now aware. There is something there, and it's becoming very, very exposed. Now, as far as Robert Mueller himself, he is tainted. He invested in a hedge fund linked to Russia, and he's got a net worth of $8 million. So he's already compromised. He shouldn't be there. Now, Tucker Carlson, he's doing a lot of good stuff, and basically says that his sources are that Robert Mueller is taking the investigation into the Podesta Group very seriously because he hasn't been able to find anything else over on the Trump side. And after all this time and all this money and all this publicity, he can't just stand up there and say, we didn't find anything. So it looks to me like the deep state is beginning to turn on Hillary and her immediate circle of associates, co-defendants, what you will. But this is not going away. And the corporate media has lost the ability to tell Americans this is a non-issue. But at this point, a judge may compel Fusion GPS to give House investigators the bank records. Fusion GPS has no legal reason to refuse a congressional subpoena. They're stalling. They're stonewalling is what they're doing. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The lawyer for this FBI informant, who's now been cleared to testify, basically told Fox News Hannity that this FBI informant can directly connect Barack Obama to the Uranium One deal, because apparently Obama was receiving daily briefings on this deal as it went down. And we now know that Obama was informed by the FBI of Russia's bribery attempts before the deal went through. So when the deal went through and Obama was being informed, he was already aware that there was bribery and corruption involved and did nothing about it. Now, amazingly enough, Obama's CIA director is saying the Intelligence Committee should look into the Clinton dossier payments and where they went. Hillary's still out there trying to say, I had no idea. I don't know where. It's amazing. I still want somebody to be looking into that Clinton Foundation. You want to do a forensic audit? That's where it needs to be. Charles Ortel has already done one based on the available public information. He says it's dirty as all heck. They come nowhere near meeting the requirements for a tax-exempt charitable foundation. And that means that the Clintons should personally be liable for all the taxes on all that money. Meanwhile, Peter Schweizer's book, Clinton Cash, is selling out on Amazon. Everybody is looking into Uranium One. They're digging for the dirt. They're not going to take the corporate media's word. There's nothing there. This is on fire. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And getting on back to the news here. Trey Gowdy is now saying that James Comey has to come and testify before Congress to explain his lies about the investigation into Hillary Clinton, and especially the email server. So Trey is out there. He's loaded for bear. And James has got a lot of explaining to do. I'm waiting for there to be a bug out, or all of a sudden a bunch of strange, suspicious suicides. Because I see a lot of bodies piling up there in Fort Marcy Park, I think. Meanwhile, Tucker Carlson's out there doing a really good job, and one of his frequent guests is Congressman Sherman, who's the guy who's actually filed impeachment papers against Donald Trump, claiming obstruction of justice. And so Sherman was on Tucker Carlson's show last night, and basically out there saying, oh, forget about the uranium deal, forget about, the dossier, we got to stay focused, we've got to impeach Trump, that's all we need to think about, just the only thing of impeach Trump, we don't want to talk about any of that other stuff. And this guy is going on, pushing the Trump-Russia collusion, and Tucker puts him on the spot and says, do you have any evidence that Russia interfered with our election, that they hacked the DNC, and Sherman came back and said, well, when you have James Comey and Sessions and all these other authoritative figures saying it must be so, I am willing to take it on faith. Resort to authority thing. So you can smell the panic. You can smell the panic. Meanwhile, Larry Klayman, who was the founder of Judicial Watch, and now he's got another group, Freedom Watch, is out there saying, this needs to have a special counsel now. Somebody who's truly independent. And I would nominate Larry Klayman for that job, because he has got a long, long track record of going after the corrupt, no matter which party they are in or whose ox got gored. Okay, we're going to take a phone call. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Yeah, I love Tucker, Mike. Like, the only thing I don't like about him, he's got to grow some balls. he lets them talk over him. He's just got to say, shut up. And, he's got to scream over him, because that's what they're doing. That guy was full of crap. They're all full of crap, Mike, because you notice he brought up the tax plan. Let's talk about the Trump tax plan that's going to let millions of people go get out of work. I'm like, where has he been for the last 50 years? Where has he been when they outsourced all the jobs back in the 80s?
They're desperate. They're desperate to find something that's going to distract from this, and there isn't anything. Everybody understands that this whole Russia hacked the DNC was nonsense. It was a leak through Seth Rich. Again, after one of the most expensive and wide-ranging investigations in U.S. history, it turns out the only person not colluding with Russia was Donald Trump. And so they're in a panic. They're desperate. They're going to start throwing their own liberal friends under the bus, like Harvey Weinstein. They may have thrown that out there to try and head this scandal off. It didn't work. We now have two scandals to look at, but we're not going to forget that first one. That Uranium One deal. And now we're finding out the United States really couldn't afford to lose that large a portion of its uranium reserves. That material was actually needed by the United States, and Hillary sold it to someone that we have all been told for the last couple of years is now our deadliest enemy, and who is now able to sell it to other countries who might actually be our real deadly enemies. That sounds a lot like treason to me, and she did it all for a fast buck. A lot of bucks, I will grant you, but still, that's what she did. And it needs to be brought out, and people need to confront that this is exactly what happened. But the problem is that it isn't just this one little crime. When you start picking at the hem of the Clintons, it's going to unravel back to all kinds of things. The tainted blood scandal, the murder of Vincent Fogg, the murder of all those people on the dead body list. Chinagate, Travelgate, all these things are all going to start coming back into the public view.
Hey, Mike, the only thing I got to disagree with, I think it was Sean Hannity or Tucker, he said, the one guy said it was from the Kremlin. When Christopher Steele was handed this dossier, it was made up already. So somebody handed it to him, and it wasn't the Russians. So it had to be somebody in the CIA, the FBI, or in Britain, or all of the above. Because it wasn't the Russians to make up this story. It was made up and handed to Christopher Steele either by the Bushes and the Clintons, so they can discredit Donald Trump. Because in reality, the Russians don't really care who gets in. They still got to deal with whoever gets in. And
Mike, okay, stay on the line. We're going to come back to you after this break. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking with Dustin in New Jersey. We're talking about the uranium scandal, or the claim that Russia was interfering with the elections. At this point, because of that Uranium One deal, I'm inclined to think that Russia would have preferred it if Hillary had won the White House, because they already had a lock on her, because they could blackmail her with the Uranium One deal. And I think the evidence of that is that the FBI had found and arrested 10 Russian spies inside the United States in connection with this deal, and Hillary Clinton worked as hard as she could to very quietly have them shipped back to Russia. The same way the U.S. government sent those arrested Mossad agents back to Israel right after 9/11. So clearly Hillary was going to do what Russia told her to do, despite the tough talk to the contrary. So this idea that Trump was favored by Russia, I don't even buy that one anymore. I really don't. So, Dustin, what is your comment here?
No, Mike, can I switch to our topics?
Sure.
I want to talk about Spain and how hypocritical the EU and like the United States is. That group, the narcocracy and the oligarchy. How if you're a country they don't like because you're in the way, they'll split you apart and put the puppets in those separate countries that they create. But if you're one of their friends that already have a puppet, in Spain per se, they don't want them to be torn apart. Because I don't see one, except for, Scotland, not one country come out to back the Catalonian, people. Isn't that
I think Russia has.
Declaration of Independence, Mike. Declaration to break yourself away from the imperialist system. Isn't that what we did with the British Empire?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, we did, and we had the help of other governments like Russia and France. And I understand that Russia is expressing support for an independent Catalonia. But you're right, it's absolute hypocrisy. It's a different set of rules. If we want this country glued together to be part of the New World Order, then we're going to crush the independence movement. But if it's a country we don't like, we're going to start breaking pieces off of it like they were trying to do originally in Iraq and are still thinking of doing in Syria.
But we're no good then, Mike. Like, this country's rotten then. Because
yes.
We're just not, like, the Republican and Democrat, there's no parties. I keep saying that it's just there's no Constitution anymore. If you believe in a Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, you would be for freedom and independence, individually or, and likewise, and all that other stuff. I mean, we just don't believe in anything anymore that had to do with this country's founding. It's a joke. I mean, it's a joke. It's not even It's not funny.
It's actually a tragedy here because our government has been hijacked by drug lords, by CIA-sanctioned drug lords, and the corruption is just as deep, in fact more so, than we saw during the height of Prohibition, where the rum runners were basically running the nation for their own regard. And so these individuals who are now in government, by default, they're not nice people. They're not concerned with how other people feel or the health of the nation. They're there to make money. And they're there to conquer, and they're there to just make war. And that's what they're doing. The power, they're drunk on the power. They're addicted to the money. And again, that's what we have. We have a criminal government made up of CIA-sanctioned drug criminals.
Thanks, Mike. Have a good show.
All right, same to you. We're going to switch over to Kathleen in Paris. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi. Back to the Uranium One deal. I am subscribed to Larry Klayman's Freedom Watch website.
Yes.
And he sent out, he's got a petition we can sign.
Okay.
I demand President Trump and Attorney General Sessions appoint Larry Klayman as special counsel to investigate the Clinton email, Uranium One, and Fusion GPS scandals. So we can sign this petition. I forwarded this to you, so you'll be able to look at it.
Okay, I was just about to ask. Oh, yeah, I'm looking at it right here, right now. Yeah, I will definitely put that up here we go. I will definitely put that up on what really happened. I'd love to see Larry Klayman in there. I'd love to see one of his former people from Judicial Watch, Alan Favish, who was the lawyer who took the Vincent Foster case all the way to the Supreme Court. I'd like to see him in there. There are people who are outside the Beltway who are perfectly competent to do these jobs, and they're not compromised by being inside the Beltway. Anyway, Kathleen, thank you very much for the information. I will definitely get that up on the next commercial break. And we're going to switch over to Poot in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I'm a contemporary of yours, and I remember when the Catholic Church had promised to release the letters at Fatima. And then in 1960, the church said, no, we're not going to release that. And I was in school at the time, and I remember the nuns crying because they were expecting to know about this miracle. And now here we are some years later, and it seems pretty much the same thing. They're pulling the rug out from under us when they were supposed to release this information. Of course, I always...
You're talking about the JFK files, right?
Heck yes.
Okay.
I always suspicioned that Daddy Bush was involved with it intimately, and that he's still alive, so they can't possibly release that information.
Well, he was definitely photographed there in Dealey Plaza. He was definitely up to his neck in the botched assault on the Bay of Pigs. And it was rather interesting when you were listening to Richard Nixon on those tape recordings in the Oval Office. He kept referring to that Bay of Pigs thing or that Cuba thing, and that was generally understood that it was an oblique reference to his opposition to Kennedy, because Richard Nixon had been fully on board with keeping Cuba basically under colonial control. Nixon was the one who facilitated the deal for United Fruit and PepsiCo to get Cuba's agricultural produce at way below market rates so that they could be hugely profitable. And so he was definitely there on line with that. And when he first ran for president against Kennedy, he was expecting he was going to win. And he was all poised. He was going to go on in there and he was going to make Cuba into, an American possession. And he lost the election. And then all of a sudden he's looking at 24 years of a Kennedy dynasty before a Republican has another shot at the White House. Because it would have been 8 for John F. Kennedy, 8 for Robert Kennedy, 8 for Teddy Kennedy. Joe Kennedy had lined them up to be a Kennedy dynasty, almost a quarter of a century of Kennedys in the White House. And that's why they decided they had to take a more direct approach, which was to get John F. Kennedy out at Dealey Plaza. Then when Lyndon Johnson refused to run for re-election, that threw the whole situation into a panic, and it allowed Robert Kennedy to come on in and start campaigning with the implication that if he attained the power and authority of the White House, he would reopen the investigation into John F. Kennedy's assassination. And, of course, Robert Kennedy was then himself assassinated at the Ambassador Hotel out in Los Angeles. Then Teddy Kennedy starts making noises about running for the White House with the understanding that if he wins the White House, he'll have the power and authority to open up both Robert and John's cases. And then he had the incident at Chappaquiddick, which may not have been a simple traffic accident. It may have been an attempted assassination that went wrong. But because Mary Jo Kopechne was in the backseat of the car and died, Ted Kennedy was so damaged he couldn't possibly run for the White House. By the way, another little historical footnote. It was through Mary Jo Kopechne that Johnson learned that John F. Kennedy was going to replace him in the second term, because one of Johnson's people was roommates with Mary Jo Kopechne. Mary Jo Kopechne was not an innocent. She was a Kennedy party girl, with all that implies. So that was that connection there. LBJ learned that John F. Kennedy wanted a different vice president in the second term, and that would have meant the end of LBJ's career at that point. Are you there? Okay, well, thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Don in Iowa. Aloha, Don. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, Mike, yes. I just saw a clip there on YouTube. Kellyanne Conway was on CNN. And it's sickening, but they're still trying. CNN is not giving up. They're still going 100% for Hillary. What she was trying to do, they're trying to frame the whole thing where, this is the same thing that Trump does. They all do the same thing. They're trying their best to say that there's nothing unusual about what happened with the dossier and all that. paying off the foreign agents and everything. But you know, and Kellyanne Conway starting to get mad about it. You know, because of course you're going to get mad. They've been talking for a year. Russia. They've been trying to send the propaganda as hard as they possibly can, and now Russia. She actually said, "Well, what's so bad about Russia? Russia's okay." You know, so it's hard to believe. It's sickening. I mean, it's sickening. You know, I never watch CNN at all, but I happen to turn on this clip from YouTube, and it makes you sick.
Yeah, it really does. But then that's why people aren't watching CNN or reading USA Today or Forbes or any of those anymore. Their audiences are way down. People don't trust the corporate media, and this is only going to make it worse because of how the corporate media was seen to just be pounding on this Russia hacked the DNC email or Russia was colluding with Trump with zero evidence whatsoever, and yet they kept pushing and saying, yeah, just believe us. We don't have any evidence, but just take our word for it. We're the authorities. You will believe it. And then they turn around, and there's literally a mountain of evidence regarding the Uranium One deal, and the corporate media's attitude is, we're not really convinced there's anything important there. And so their liberal bias, or let's be more honest, their control by the CIA has never been more obviously on display.
It's propaganda. Like you say, they're not getting paid by their advertising revenue. I mean, the corporate sponsors will buy their ads, but the ads are not there to actually, because they're paying more for the ads than what they're worth. What they're trying to do is get control. They're trying to use it as a propaganda arm.
Yeah, they are, but they don't have a monopoly anymore. I mean, back when John F. Kennedy was killed, the media was under the control of the CIA through Operation Mockingbird. And everybody got into lockstep with, the crazed lone assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. And, anybody who thought he was with the CIA was a kook and a nut and a conspiracy theorist. In fact, the phrase conspiracy theorist was invented as a propaganda tool in the wake of the John F. Kennedy assassination, and how many people were questioning that official story. So, but that was back then when people just didn't have a choice but to look at what the corporate media, the magazines, the TV, radio were saying and say, oh, I guess that's what's going on. That world is gone. There is now a true diversity of perception here in the United States, and it's called the independent media. And that's why they're trying to find some way they can shut us all down, getting around that First Amendment, screaming that we're all fake news, screaming that we're arms of Russian propaganda, and just endless smears, and, of course, direct attacks on our finances and on our servers and the rest of it. They love to play dirty. They think it's their divine right.
Right. Okay, well, anyway, I just wanted to pass that on, that, what Trump should have done, and he could still do it, what I thought he would do from when he took over as president, he could just say, CNN, you're just so fake that you're not even invited to be in the press pool anymore. So just go get your fake news somewhere else. He could have done. He could still kick him out. I mean, yeah, he did kind of talk.
Well, he put them in the back row for a while here, But the corporate media has basically united together, and they've sent a message to the White House. Okay, you will have to deal with us. You will go through us to reach the public. If you try and go around us, we will just make it our mission in life to absolutely destroy you. And Trump, I think, is playing it a little bit cautiously. But we're right now on this Uranium One deal and on this dossier deal. This could turn out to be the final battle between the corporate media and the independent media over who's going to be more trusted by the American people. And right now it looks to me like the independent media is winning that one.
Trump is trying to be cautious. It might turn out to be maybe he's just playing like at a slow roll, and he's giving them enough rope to hang themselves, and pretty soon here things will be looking pretty good. Okay, I'll let you go, Mike.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot. But I mean, on the first indictment, the first conviction, and again, we saw the exact same thing back during Watergate, where the Washington Post was the sole exception. The rest of the media was saying, there's nothing there. It's ridiculous. To even think that a president of the United States of America would do these kind of things. And then all of a sudden, these top officials started being indicted, charged, sent to jail, forced to resign. And that's when the rest of the media finally said, okay, we have to cover this a little bit more honestly because we're looking like idiots out here. And we're coming up on that moment here relative to the Uranium One scandal and the dossier scandal. There's going to come a point where the corporate media is going to say, we're looking really bad here, we're losing audience, we're losing advertisers, and we're either going to have to start giving the American people the truth about what's going on, or we're just going to be out of business. And that is just the way it is going to be. All right, so the phone lines are now open again. We're going to get back and do a little bit of news here. Senator Orrin Hatch, Republican of Utah, has announced that he plans to retire. He is not going to run for re-election. And apparently former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney intends to run for Hatch's seat. Romney may still have long-term ambitions for that White House. But again, looking at some of the stuff that came on out about how he does his business and how many lives he's ruined, how many companies he's ruined. I don't want him there at all. And again, especially the lesson from the last year. I don't know about you, but I am really sick and tired of every 4 years having to choose the lesser of two evils to bow down in obeisance to. And I think that needs to change. We need to start going back to electing the best amongst us, the statesmen, the people who really care about the nation and its people, not just gangsters looking for another edge and another business opportunity and another scam. Because we're in serious, serious trouble here. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And amazingly enough, there's been a breakthrough in the IRS gate story. We have so many of these gates to keep track of. The American Center for Law and Justice has won a years-long legal battle against the Internal Revenue Service in which the IRS has now admitted that it wrongfully targeted conservatives during the Obama administration specifically because of their political viewpoints. And the IRS has issuing an apology. They're hanging their head in mock shame and saying it'll never happen again. But they're saying, yes, these groups were targeted for harassment, delay, neglect on their applications and paperwork, specifically because of their political points of view. And keep in mind that the same corporate media that is telling you there is nothing to the Uranium One scandal or the dossier scandal, we're also saying, no, there's nothing to the IRS scandal. Really, it didn't happen. None of this stuff happened. So just keep that in mind in the coming weeks here. Along with the fact that it's the same corporate media who assured you Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons. All right, we're going to go back to the phones here. Tom in Indiana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I want to thank you for showing us all the false flags that have been around. This one has been, with the JFK opening up the papers and stuff like that, I think you've heard of the passage of the Gun Control Act of 1968?
Yes.
And that was pushed by LBJ because Lee Harvey Oswald assassinated the president with a mail-order gun that he bought. Now, if it proves out that that wasn't the actual gun that shot Kennedy, can we rescind all this stuff and lay it where the blame should be?
Well, it would be nice to be able to do it, but I mean, I think Jim Garrison pretty much established that that particular Mannlicher Carcano rifle couldn't have been the assassination weapon. For one thing, the scope was defective. It wasn't lined up. Whatever you aimed at and you pulled that trigger, the bullet was going to go someplace else. So that gun was basically planted there, and the reason they chose the Mannlicher Carcano was because the original goal of assassinating Kennedy, one of the agendas, they were going to blame Cuba for it. Remember, this is after that whole Bay of Pigs thing had gone down and led to the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then the CIA was engaged in Operation Mongoose, where they were going to try and go for a second invasion of Cuba, and Kennedy got word of it, and he shut it all down because he didn't want to trigger a nuclear war with Khrushchev. So what the plotters in the assassination did was they understood that following the Bay of Pigs invasion, Castro was importing cargo ships full of these very inexpensive Mannlicher Carcano rifles from Italy, and he was arming all of the Cuban people to be ready in case there was another U.S. attack. And that's why they chose that rifle, because they had laid a paper trail of phony Oswalds going down to Mexico, over to Cuba, and coming back. And LBJ knew that they weren't going to be able to go with that framing of Cuba without triggering a war, and that's when it morphed into Oswald acted alone. We'll be back after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, do you remember that big stink they tried to make over the fact that there were some Russian ads on Twitter, ads from Russia Today, and oh my goodness, Russia Today was using Twitter to sway the election, and they were able to overcome Hillary's multi-million-dollar campaign with only $100,000 worth of ads placed. And they tried to make a big stink about it, and it turned out the ads were actually issue-specific. They didn't talk about Trump or Hillary. And now it's come on out that apparently Twitter was soliciting that advertising. During the election, Twitter approached Russia Today and said, we'd like to run your ads. That's how that came about. Twitter somehow forgot to mention that during all this stink about, oh, these Russian ads. Twitter is now saying they will no longer accept advertising from Russia Today and Sputnik. And I'm sure Russia Today and Sputnik will find other places that will carry their advertising and do them right here. Now, getting on back to the JFK document release. As I said before the release happened, I'm not expecting anything really significant to come on out. And, of course, at the 11th hour, Donald Trump has held back a few hundred of those files at the behest of the FBI and the CIA, who don't want to give those wacky conspiracy theorists any more fuel to doubt the official story because, golly, we've just been down that road so many times of debunking them, and that House Select Committee on Assassinations concluding there was a conspiracy. Well, we don't know what was wrong with those people. They must have been drunk, so forth and so on. But there have been a few little bits of information in these documents, and apparently one is further confirmation that, yes, Lee Harvey Oswald was employed by the CIA, and he was trained by the CIA to participate in Soviet assignments. And it was rather interesting because if you go back and you look at the Garrison case against Clay Shaw, and they were looking at Oswald's records, and they were saying, why is he getting all this training in the Russian language? He's just supposed to be a radar operator. So confirmation, yeah, Oswald was CIA. Now, there's another piece of information that surfaced from these documents that the U.S. had plans to murder Cuban refugees and blame Castro to ignite yet another war against Cuba. And they're saying these are documents related to Operation Mongoose, which was that attempt for a second invasion, and was the CIA's plot to remove Castro from power. And I think, they don't mention it by name, but I think what they're describing here is Operation Northwoods, where they were going to have terrorist attacks against Cuban refugees headed to or already inside the United States. And this was approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to create a pretext for invading Cuba and overthrowing the Castro regime. So keep this in mind as we get closer and closer to military action with North Korea. Is what we're seeing on the news really what's going on? Probably not. Operation Northwoods underscores the fact that the U.S. will use trickery to start a war. Remember, Pearl Harbor was not a surprise. Roosevelt spent all of that year goading the Japanese into the attack. The only people it was a surprise to was General Short and Admiral Kimmel, who were kept in the dark. There was no Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. There were no torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. Saddam did not have nuclear weapons. Assad was not gassing his own people. Iran was not building a nuclear bomb. And the only reason North Korea wants to build a nuclear bomb and a missiles, they're seeing the U.S. invading everybody who doesn't have one. Now, right now, unfortunately, our government is desperate to get a major war going ahead of the collapse of the economy. And if they can't find somebody who's willing to oblige by firing first, they'll fake an attack, like they plan to do in Operation Northwoods, like Hitler did at Gleiwitz. False flags are a part of history. They've been used many times. And now, of course, we have Syria is accusing Israel of using false flag attacks to justify their aggressions, that these errant artillery shells that are hitting absolutely nothing in Israel are being fired by the Israelis. Another little piece of information out of these new JFK files show that Lyndon Johnson may have been a member of the KKK. So that's where we are on that one. Now, apparently, J. Edgar Hoover insisted on trying to make the U.S. believe Oswald was the sole assassin. Remember, there was that fight going on because the original plotters wanted to link it to Cuba to get that second invasion going. And Johnson, with Hoover, had to pull the plug on that because Johnson knew that the secret agreement between Kennedy and Khrushchev that ended the Cuban Missile Crisis was the understanding if the U.S. ever dared set foot in Cuba again, Russia would launch with the nuclear missiles. No warning, no discussion, no nothing. It would just be there. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So basically, the Cuban assassination plot against our president was transformed into Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Interestingly enough, the Soviet agents who were looking into this assassination were convinced that Dallas cops were involved in the killing. And we know that there was some, shall we say, cooperation there because of the way Jack Ruby was allowed into the basement of the Dallas Police Department to shoot and kill Lee Harvey Oswald, who was supposed to have died at the Texas Theater. See, normally when you have some kind of an event like this, you want the shooter, the assassin, the terrorist to be killed on the site so they can't contradict the official story. And Jack Ruby had to cowboy Lee Harvey Oswald. And he was allowed into the basement of the Dallas Police Station by an officer named Ray Vaughn, who then, after this stunning failure at security, went on to become the chief of police at Midlothian, Texas. The police officer who'd been in charge of the Dallas side of Kennedy's security, and then later security for Lee Oswald, having lost both of his charges, eventually became the chief of police of Dallas. So you see how this stuff all kind of works out. There were a lot of people involved. A lot of people wanted John F. Kennedy dead. And it's important to understand at this stage in world history, assassinations and wars never happen for just one reason. You'll be told it's one reason. It keeps the lies to a simple level, keeps it to a minimum. But there were a lot of people who hated John F. Kennedy. Organized crime hated him. They felt they'd helped him win the election, only to have him turn on organized crime and sick his brother Robert on them as Attorney General. You had Israel absolutely hated John F. Kennedy because he was adamant that Israel not be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons. You had the Texas oil billionaires who were losing billions of dollars over the oil depletion allowance issue. And then you had the Federal Reserve who were angered over Kennedy's issuance of a United States note that was not issued as a loan at interest, cutting into their profitability. So there were a lot of people who did not like Kennedy. And, of course, his intention to pull out of Vietnam angered the Pentagon. A lot of people in the CIA felt Kennedy had betrayed them at the Bay of Pigs by yanking the plug. But Kennedy said the CIA had lied to him about the strength of support for a U.S. invasion by the Cuban people. It just wasn't really there. So when you see somebody gearing up for a war, there's usually a large number of players. And they all want slightly different things. But they all overlap where they agree that a war or an assassination is what serves their interests best. Now, speaking of serving interests, remember Corrine Brown, former congresswoman, She spent almost 25 years representing Florida in Congress, and she has now been found guilty of taking money from a charity that was purported to be giving scholarships to poor students. And the verdict came after the prosecutors outlined a pattern of fraud by Corrine Brown, who's now 70, and her top aide that included using hundreds of thousands of dollars from the One Door for Education Foundation for lavish parties, trips, and shopping excursions. She was convicted of 18 of the 22 charges against her, including lying on her taxes and on her congressional financial disclosure forms. Now, this Corrine Brown, you've probably heard the name before. She partied with Nancy Pelosi. She flew on Air Force One right next to President Obama, and she was a superdelegate in last year's election, and she voted for Hillary Clinton. So it kind of makes you wonder, are all of Hillary Clinton's supporters criminals of one form or another? Maybe it's just simpler to just do a count and say how many of Hillary Clinton's supporters are not criminals of one form or another. Anybody? Any hands? Anybody? Bueller? Bueller? Turning over to the war zones here, the UN Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons is basically issuing a report supporting the initial findings, which blamed Syria's Air Force for deploying sarin in the Syrian town last April. And they're still saying sarin was delivered via an aerial bomb dropped by an airplane. Now, here's the problem with that. In that first original report, nobody ever actually went to the site. They just relied on reports from people in the region. And Russia's permanent mission to the UN is expressing concern that cherry-picked details of the findings are already being leaked to the media to try and resell that old tired canard that Assad is using chemical weapons on his own people. And again, it is absurd on the face of it. Look for what should be there and isn't. And what was never there in any of these claims of Assad gassing his own people right in front of the UN chemical weapons inspectors virtually on the day that they arrived is a reason for him to do something that stupid. He's all but won the war. Okay? The world is getting used to the idea of Assad staying on as the ruler of Syria. Why would he do the one thing that would allow the United States to come back in and take his country away from him? And the answer is he wouldn't. There's no benefit to Assad gassing his own Alawite supporters. They're his people. That's like Obama gassing Democrats. It doesn't make any sense. It never made any sense. But it's just another variation on the theme of Saddam has nuclear weapons. North Korea is going to launch on this. How many times do you have to be lied to before you realize that's how these wars get started? And that's what they're trying to do again. Meanwhile, over in Iraq, Iraq's military forces are on the verge of capturing the last ISIS stronghold. And that will basically be it in Iraq. Same situations coming to a head or to a conclusion in Syria. And both countries are saying it's time for the U.S. to leave. It is time for the U.S. to get out. You are not invited here. You don't have our permission here. ISIS and Al-Qaeda are now gone. You don't have a justification to be here. Which is why all of a sudden we have Tillerson back to talking about we see a future of a united Syria but without Assad. So they're dropping that whole pretext about being in Syria for ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they're back to, we just need to get Assad out. And we'll make up a good reason. Let's go back and try the gassing his own people one, and if that doesn't work, we'll say he has a Death Star. Or he's torturing small kittens in the microwave oven in his bedroom. We'll find something that'll get people on our side to get rid of him. Meanwhile, Pakistan is saying it's time for the United States to accept they are defeated in Afghanistan. There is no military resolution possible, and it's time for a political solution. It's time for an exit strategy. Of course, we know what we're hearing from the U.S. government. They're just going to pour more and more people in there. Eric Prince is saying, let me go in with my mercenaries and we'll do great work of it. But again, insanity is defined as doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. There is a reason Afghanistan is called the graveyard of empires. And I imagine Putin has been laughing his head off all these years over the fact that the U.S. walked into this same mistake that the British did and the Soviet Union did. But Pakistan is right. The U.S. is unable to win in Afghanistan. They're just pouring more children and more money in there so they can say, well, at least we're not losing. At least we're not losing. See, that's a good thing. Story coming out of Blacklisted News talking about our policy toward Iran is very clearly being dictated by Israel and Netanyahu. We have polls showing the majority of the American people are very happy with the Iran nuclear deal. You have many officials within the U.S. government are saying, yeah, let's just leave things the way they are. Europe, which is co-signers on this agreement, they're all saying, absolutely, let's leave it alone. So why is Trump moving forward with decertifying, getting ready to dump the deal, getting ready to make war on Iran, which has not done anything to us at all, because that's what Israel wants. Israel wants Iran smashed to rubble the way they already did to Iraq. And it's one of the areas in which I'm very, very disappointed in Donald Trump. Because if there's one quality we would like to see in a president, is that policy decisions are not made on the base of who is a family friend and who is not. That appears to be what's going on here. Interestingly enough, U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis is all of a sudden deciding to play the role of diplomat. He's over in Thailand this week, calling for peace on the Korean Peninsula. And he's saying, let's look for a peaceful resolution with North Korea. And he's out there saying, do we have the military options in defense if we're attacked or our allies are attacked? Of course we do. But everyone is out for a peaceful resolution. The U.S. is not rushing to war with North Korea. Maybe. Frankly, it looked to me like North Korea was just testing their weapons, which everybody who's building weapons, they test them. U.S. tests missiles over here on the next island over. Russia just tested a really big one. We'll be talking about that later in the show. You know, when I was building black powder firearms as a kid, there was always that one point where you'd have it roughed together and you'd put a load on and you'd pull the trigger and see if the thing was going to work. That's just part of weapons development, and that's all North Korea's been doing. Meanwhile, South Korea is upping the ante. They have announced plans to develop a new surface-to-surface missile that they claim will be able to reach North Korea's bunkers and long-range artillery facilities. The missile is designated the Hyunmoo-4, and it's a more powerful version of two other types of surface-to-surface missiles now in South Korea's arsenal. So South Korea is getting ready to sneer at North Korea, and everybody's getting ready to sneer at everybody else. But I think one of the cautionary tales here is that Mattis may be backing off being openly aggressive against North Korea, barring a false flag. They could still go that route. But the realization that North Korea may not have a deployable nuclear weapon in an ICBM right now, but that if the U.S. were to go to war with North Korea and was not able to do a first strike, take them all out, the war would drag on so long that it was inevitable before the war was over, North Korea would have that capability. So you'd want to take a good look at that. Meanwhile, Israel is all of a sudden having second thoughts about their brand new spanky shiny F-35 fighter jets, because they're starting to be delivered, the A version, and Israel is kicking the tires, and they're starting to say they're not happy. They don't think it was a good decision to buy this F-35. And apparently there was a military review put together by various defense-related ministries within the Israeli government. The conclusion was reached with specific regard to the acquisition of the F-35 fighters that placed emphasis on need to meticulously assess the jets already purchased, and interestingly enough, to begin considering alternatives if the aircraft did not meet Israeli Air Force expectations. Now, this sudden compromise in confidence over the fighter's ability by Israel following practical assessment, meaning they took it out for a test flight, comes as no surprise, for the aircraft is already being reported as inherently flawed among every nation that has tested it, including the United States itself. It is a boondoggle. It is a horrendous boondoggle. And I know they're deploying some of them to Japan, and by golly, don't they look spiffy sitting there on the runway. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, I alluded to this earlier in the program. Russia has carried out a successful test firing of their Satan II ballistic missile, and it was fired last night from the Plesetsk Cosmodrome, and it flew 3,600 miles before hitting its target on the Kura test range. And this missile can carry 12 nuclear warheads. And here is the kicker. We mentioned this the other day. Each warhead has a yield potentially of 40 megatons. This is a single rocket that can basically destroy an entire country. Now, 3 submarines capable of carrying nuclear warheads also carried out successful ballistic missile tests, while 3 bombers hit ground targets with cruise missiles. Apparently, this was all part of a large military drill. But that Satan II missile, that is definitely a game changer. That is a monster. And Russia has always built big bombs. The further the U.S. would dig down into the ground, places like Cheyenne Mountain, the Russian answer was, we'll just make a bomb big enough to make sure we get it. The biggest nuclear weapon ever built was built by Russia, was called the Tsar bomb. And its maximum yield was 100 megatons, and the Soviets were so scared of it, they dialed it down to 50 for the test, and it still was a huge, gigantic blast. Now then, the U.S. is once again looking at a new round of sanctions against Russia. And so there's all these Russian defense companies are on this list of new U.S. sanctions. You know, by golly, we're going to give you what for? How dare you hack into the DNC emails, and how dare you interfere with our plans for global domination? So Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has authorized the Department of Justice to issue guidance, the State Department to issue guidance to the public specifying the persons or entities that are part of or operating on behalf of the defense or intelligence sectors of the government of the Russian Federation. So basically they've just declared economic war against the Russian government. And economic wars are very often the harbinger of real wars. Now, on that very topic, Max Kaiser is out there sounding a warning, this is over in Russia today, that China's starting of selling oil contracts in the petro-yuan may trigger a U.S. attack, because the U.S. empire of debt will go to war to stop the emergence of the petro-yuan, just like they went to war against Iraq to stop the sale of Iraq's oil for the euro, just like they went to war in Libya to stop the sale of Libya's oil in the gold dinar. Now, maybe the U.S. will realize that China is not the military pushover that Iraq and Libya were, and that will restrain their hand. But Max Kaiser is right. That is what's driving all of these wars from the U.S. government side. A desire to drag the world back to being forced to use the U.S. dollar for global trade and banking, off of which Wall Street makes a small profit. And even worse, use that global currency to exert political control on other countries. Now, we all remember Mattel toys. I do, especially because there was at one point my father worked for them, and I got to be a toy tester. I think I was like 13 when that happened. Anyway, Mattel, iconic name, started the Hot Wheels craze. They had a lot of really cool things. And unfortunately, their stock took a 24% hit following the announcement that they were going to suspend their quarterly dividend starting in the fourth quarter of this year, and instead use the cash to shore up its faltering business, because they took a big hit following the bankruptcy of its largest retailer, Toys R Us. Remember what I told you about? If you've got Christmas shopping for little kids, you get to the Toys R Us now. They're not getting in any more inventory. What's on the shelves right now is what's going to be there until they close. So get that done. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm looking over here on CNN, and they're trying to push this idea that Trump and the White House are trying to basically shut down the probe into the Trump-Russia collusion. Well, here's where it gets sticky, because if, in fact, the FBI used this bogus dossier to get these FISA warrants, then the entire investigation is illegitimate. Because under that Fourth Amendment, you have to have real evidence of a crime. Not something that you just wrote up and said, I think this guy's doing a crime, give me a warrant. It doesn't work that way. So Mueller may not even have a mandate. And don't forget, Mueller's special counsel is itself already illegal, because there's a specific law that says before a special counsel can be appointed, there has to be a preliminary investigation by Congress to determine that there is an issue there that requires a special counsel. You can't just pop one out there. So the whole thing is really crooked, but CNN is out there just trying to say that, oh, how dare Trump try and defend himself from this Trump-Russian investigation. I mean, this is a crime that's so hideous that even innocence cannot be used as a defense. But as far as Hillary, forget all that evidence. It's a nothing burger. Nothing burger. All right, let's take a phone call. Francis in Vancouver. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I was just sort of thinking a lot lately about this big Russian military exercise on their western border that took place at the end of September.
Yes.
And there's 90,000 soldiers involved, but the really interesting aspect of it was that during the exercise, they basically shut down all the GPS in Norway and all the cellular services in Latvia. And when you add that to the fact, like, I think it was the USS Donald Cook getting shut down by a Russian fighter jet using electronic countermeasures, and that was in the Black Sea, and then there was a similar incident with a U.S. warship in the Baltic Sea. You got to sort of, like, ask yourself if, like, for starters, if the whole U.S. surface fleet is just obsolete and a waste of money.
Well, much of it is. It's older designs, and unfortunately the new ones that are trying to bring on, like the Freedom class and Independence class littoral combat ships, not to mention the Zumwalt and the Gerald R. Ford, are basically very expensive, very ineffective pieces of junk. So we've forgotten how to make a cost-effective weapon system, and that is a terrible position to be going into as you head into a world war. We know, because of what happened with the USS Fitzgerald and the USS John S. McCain, that there is a serious problem with finding qualified commanders for these very expensive naval platforms. I mean, look how much damage the Navy has suffered. We're not even officially at war yet, and we've got 2 of these ships down. So there are some serious problems with our military right now, which is a good reason to get off this war agenda. We're not going to win this thing.
Well, that's true. But the other thing is were those ships actually, like, there's one aspect to it, like, were the personnel running the ships incompetent, or were the ships hacked?
No, the Navy concluded that the command crews were incompetent. They've been relieved of duty. And it's very obvious to me, having spent some time under sail myself, that whoever had the con didn't understand there is a pecking order for right-of-way when ships are crossing each other. And those large super tankers and cargo ships, they're number 1 on the list. Okay, and it looked to me like somebody just thought they were going to just dart around in front of them, and you're not supposed to do that. That's why those rules are out there, to minimize these kinds of problems.
Yeah.
Okay?
So, well, anyway, have a good Friday.
All right, same to you. We're going to switch over to Thomas in Florida. Aloha, Thomas. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Okay, looks like we may have lost Thomas. Are you there? Going
Hello?
once? There you are.
Yes, I'm here.
There you are. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I apologize. I haven't been listening to your show simply because my computer went down, and maybe I'm a bit off topic if you have specific topics you're talking about today, but I had a question that maybe you could answer. We, about 2 weeks ago, received a message from Windows. They called themselves Windows Security Headquarters, and they said, "You have errors and warnings reports. Please contact us," and gave us a number and an officer's number, a guy named Williams. And we ignored it. We thought it was a scam.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got another one on Wednesday and ignored it again. And lo and behold, this morning, our computer shut down. And we haven't made any calls to where they want us to call. And I'm wondering, did you ever hear of that?
I haven't heard of one where somebody's computer actually gets shut down if you don't phone the phone number. But it's probably a new evolution in the step of ransomware. And it really is totally out of control. And when you say your computer shut down, is it refusing to boot or is it just refusing to turn on? Maybe it's just a hardware problem.
It's refusing to turn on, and we have another computer in the house, a laptop, and it won't work either. In other words, we've been shut off, it appears. And I have a computer expert that I use to come, and I'm going to have him come over, but I'm just wondering if they said legal actions will be taken against your computer, and they said your case number, and they gave us the case number and the guy's name, and it seemed like such a scam at first, but they really did shut it off, and I'm just wondering if they have the power.
It does sound like a scam, and unfortunately, thanks to the NSA and the CIA, these cyber criminals have very easy access to the internals of your machine. And, the very best computer weapons out there are now in the hands of these cyber criminals, and they're making use of them. And this looks to me like a situation of sort of pre-ransomware. They don't actually get your system infected. They just say, you got to call us and you got to deal with us, or we will shut you down. So it does sound, if there really is a link between the shutdown of your computers and these emails that you were getting, that definitely qualifies as extortion.
Yeah, well, it wasn't an email. It was nothing more than a message on our answering machine, and the guy said, Windows Security Headquarters. And I'm going, gee. Yeah, I guess I'll have our computer guy look at it first to see if it's a scam. But, we have like RBN streaming all the time at this house, and I'm wondering, do you think it's any possibility that they were, like, shutting us down because we're, what do you want to call it, persona non grata, whatever.
Okay, well, I'm looking here. I just did a Google search, and yes, this whole thing about Windows Security Headquarters, it is a scam. I'm not seeing any reports about how they're actually physically shutting your machine down, but I would be very interested in what your computer security person says actually happened, okay?
Okay. Yeah, so it is a scam that you see.
Yes, it is a scam.
It seems very scam-like. Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. And it is out of control. And maybe one of the reasons the U.S. government doesn't want to do anything about it is because it's really their fault. They allowed these very expensive taxpayer-funded cyber weapons to be leaked out onto the dark web, and now they're being used against all of us. And so the U.S. government is going to pretend it's not a problem because anybody who looks at the problem is going to say, well, look, you guys caused this. You drilled all these holes in our security so you could spy on us, even though we're not doing anything wrong. And then the cyber criminals find the holes, and they're causing all kinds of damage to our productivity, to our economy. This was not well thought out. It's another classic case of we've got to have access to the people's computers. Okay. And then inadvertently you open up the opportunity for cybercrime. Or maybe they are the cyber criminals. Maybe CIA and NSA are the cyber criminals. Kaspersky seems to think so. All right, let's see. Al in Canada. Aloha, Al. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I hope you're doing well.
Doing fine.
That last caller, that's good. The last caller needs to boot into safe mode, right? And obviously run, some kind of spyware app. some boot time spyware app. Anyway, are you a big fan at all of James Spader?
Yeah, why?
The key played in Boston. Well, he played in Boston Legal, and now he plays in The Blacklist.
Oh, I worked with him on Stargate.
In Boston. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, now I'm a big fan of you again.
No, he's a nice guy.
Boston Legal was shut down. Oh, I love the guy. Boston Legal was a pretty neat show. They were actually talking about a lot of day-to-day, things that happen and whatnot. But so James Spader's in well, it's not new anymore. They're in their 5th season, The Blacklist. Their most recent episode was basically kind of about. I'm sorry for the spoilers, people. It was basically about kind of like false flag operations. And at one point in the movie, or the series, they say, well, when you keep the population terrorized, it's easy to have bloated budgets for the military. Could you say something like that, like 40 years ago, and get away with it, even though it's the truth?
Generally not. But I think my favorite episode of Boston Legal was Stick It, which is where you have that wonderful speech about, what's gone wrong with this country, where we're lying about Saddam's nuclear weapons, there's unwarranted surveillance, and it's not Spader's character, it's one of the others who does that speech. And it used to be all over YouTube, but for some reason that's kind of been scrubbed. But I noticed that on one of our cable box channels, they are rerunning all the early Boston Legals, and I did record that episode so I could watch it again, because it was really good, and they do cover a lot of very important topics.
Oh, they were fantastic. I mean, they even covered, and it was crazy. Denny Crane and Alan were getting married. And they weren't even gay. I mean, and at the time, I believe it was in most states in the United States, it was illegal for same-sex marriages, and and they actually made it like comical, so that we would become more acceptant of such things. But obviously, Boston Legal was only around for a couple of seasons, I think 4, and I don't think they ever had a 24-episode season. They were cut off because of probably this controversy that they were stirring up. And unfortunately, it's too bad, but that's the way it goes with some of these series.
Yep.
It's the way it is. But we're getting away from the point. But the point is, like with this recent episode of The Blacklist, was they're actually talking now about false flags and keeping the American people terrorized. So they're willing, as you say, just like you say, willing to give their money and their children, and it's all bull.
Yeah.
With a capital S and a capital blah blah and a T, or BEX. It's classic. Okay. I thank you for your time.
All right, you got it. We're gonna switch over to Joe in California. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Whoop, I guess we lost Joe. Hello?
Can you hear me okay?
I hear you fine.
I'm here, Mike.
Yes. What's on your mind?
I was going to let you know that I had experience with that blue screen call-in ransomware that the guy was talking about earlier, and I actually called in to the number on the screen because that's all you could do. It was just a blue screen with a message from Microsoft and a phone number, but it was a ransomware scam. I didn't know that, but I called them up, they wanted me to pay like a couple $100 to get things straightened out and install some new protection on the computer, whatever. I told them, shell it for $200, I'm going to go buy another computer.
Yeah.
And I took it to my computer repairman here in town, and he said, well, I'm glad you didn't pay for it because it's a scam. And he took the computer, did whatever he had to do, reinstall whatever, and it works good as new again.
Well, it is a major, major problem, and it is you have to wonder, why is the government so unconcerned? I mean, obviously, if the cyber criminals are attacking the government's computers, they make a big stink about it. But it's almost like the government's attitude is, we're just here to be harvested for money, and what a really great way to harvest for money, but to force us to buy security software for an out-of-control cyber crime. Or it may be that the cyber crime is actually the virtual parallel to civil forfeiture. We live under a government right now that is plundering and looting and pillaging its own population to keep its war funding intact. And, in addition to the police just pulling people over and grabbing all kinds of wealth and assets, which Sessions says is a powerful law enforcement tool, maybe the NSA's main job right now is going on out and committing all this cyber crime and plundering the American people as another source of wealth for the war machine. Because Kaspersky Group has linked the hacker collective, the Equation Group, with the NSA. And we know we're dealing with a government that has no moral qualms whatsoever about using torture, using chemical weapons, selling drugs to its own children. So it's really possible that they're just capable of all kinds of this stuff. But you need to do the best that you can for your computer security. But it is out of control. My brother got hit with ransomware. And he had tons of security on his machine. They still got through. And the cyber criminals are able to get through because they're getting all of these military-grade NSA, CIA spy tools. In fact, that bad rabbit that's going on over all over the world, mostly in Russia and Asia, it's using the NSA's eternal romance exploit. So there you have another example of a taxpayer-funded cyber weapon that is now being used against the taxpayers.
Yeah, this seems to be the new form of protection pay that they used to have back in the 30s.
That's exactly what it is. You buy some security software, or something bad going to happen to your computer.
Yeah, exactly, Mike.
Okay?
All right, buddy. Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. We're going to take a break for commercials. We're going to come back with another phone call. Then we're going to be at the top of the hour, and the lovely Lady Claire. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're going to go right back to the phones here. Kevin in West Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mr. Mike. I was wondering, do you think that with these JFK files that have been released, some of them actually, do you feel it was a kind of like a negating thing for the CIA not to give them all up, the 200 or so that they did not give, to kind of like to nullify the president for going ahead and saying, hey, let's go ahead and release these?
Well, first of all, everybody seems to have this mistaken impression that Donald Trump just said we're going to go ahead and release the files. No, that's not the case. Congress passed a law quite some time ago that mandated the release of all these files by this date. And so, in point of fact, Donald Trump, in yielding to CIA and FBI pressure to withhold these additional files, is technically in violation of that law. Everything was supposed to be out at this point, and maybe they're just trying to build suspense. Maybe they're trying to use this to try and draw attention away from Uranium One and the dossier scandals. Not going to work, I might add. Or it may be that, given that there have been some rather tasty little tidbits in the files that were released, there may in fact be some stuff in there that really would undermine the official story of the crazed lone nut assassin, which is still the official story, despite the House Select Committee on Assassinations concluding that there was, in fact, more than one shooter in Dealey Plaza that day.
No, I totally agree. And I just was wondering, because of Poppy Bush still being alive, I was wondering if his name isn't floating around in those 200 or so documents that were not released. Because he's the only one that's still alive, right?
As far as I know, yeah, he's the only one still out there, and they're saying it's only for a few months, but I would say that in all probability, there's something in those. Certainly makes them look like they've got something to hide. It makes them look guilty, and politics is perception. So anyway,
oh, yeah, absolutely.
As we get more into the end of November, closer to Thanksgiving, we'll spend a lot more time on JFK. But for right now, the focus is still going to be back on the dossier gate, and Uranium Gate. And while we're at that, we're going to dig up all the other gates as well. Travelgate, Chinagate, murder of Vince Foster, and just all that stuff. It's time for all of it to just be shoved out there into the public so that people start to confront the true nature of those who rule us and the means by which they stole our nation from us.
If anything you put on your website on what really happened, can I take that and push it out there on Facebook or Twitter, or
if it's,
can I copy them and hand them out?
If it's my original work, yes, you are free to copy. If it's something that's linked from someplace else, well, you're welcome to post the link. The only thing you're not allowed to do is do a complete copy and paste of somebody else's work and post it as if it's your own. That's a copyright violation. But as far as the original content on my website, it's all in the public domain. Help yourself. Have fun with it. Thank you for the call, Kevin. We've got to take a break here, and when we come on back, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on BAM Music TV, this gorgeous creature sitting to my side is the lovely Lady Claire, who likes to share hour number 3 of Fridays with us with her unique perspective on the world. I'm admiring the jewelry that you're wearing.
Yes.
And, it's even got a place for a stone in there. That's amazing. All right, so what's the first thing you want to talk about today?
I am very, very concerned about information coming forward regarding that Niger attack on Americans. U.S. soldiers were left behind in the evacuation, and this is just starting to come forward. Now, Mattis maintains that this never happened, but as details continue to emerge, it appears increasingly certain that Mattis just didn't tell the world the truth, with officials now saying that when French helicopters evacuated the U.S. forces, they had lost contact with 4 U.S. troops and only evacuated 7 out of 11 in the unit. Hours later, when they managed to return to recover the bodies of the 3 soldiers initially reported killed, the 4th soldier wasn't found for another 2 days. That the troops left without contact with the 4 makes it uncertain if some might have been alive at the time and died abandoned on the field. Mike, if in fact this happened, it never, ever should have happened. Ever. I mean, we have a tradition in the military that we never leave men behind.
Well, that's often not practical, but in this case, they were simply unprepared for what was going on. They were in love with the myth of their own invincibility, and they got caught off guard, and they got cut off from their support. And the reality is, while we like to say we never leave any of our soldiers behind, it does unfortunately happen. It obviously did in this particular circumstance.
And I feel so terrible for the widows and families of the people who got killed.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about Africa and the U.S. presence there a little bit later. But right now I'd like to bop on over to the U.K.
Bop away.
Michael Fallon made the observation that criticizing Saudi Arabia is not helpful for UK arms sales to Saudi Arabia. And he urged MPs to stop criticizing Saudi Arabia in the interests of securing a fighter jet deal, provoking a lot of blowback from human rights and arms trade campaigners. And apparently more than 100 people were arrested over London arms fair protests. The Defense Secretary was giving evidence to the Commons Defense Committee when he was pressed about why a deal to sell Typhoon jets to Saudi Arabia had not yet been signed. Fallon said that he had been working very hard on the deal and had traveled to Jeddah in September to discuss it with his Saudi counterpart. And although Qatar had agreed 2 days earlier to buy 24 jets from the UK, Fallon had to settle for signing a largely meaningless joint defense agreement with the Saudis. Now, I have a question for the British press, which is known generally to have maybe a few more quote-unquote male attributes than their American counterparts. And I want one of those people to ask Michael Fallon how it feels to be colluding with Saudi Arabia in war crimes.
It feels profitable.
Yeah, because the sales of these fighters are certainly a glaring, egregious example of this. Every day, the Saudis are bombarding Yemeni citizens, civilians, innocent children, women, infants, the medically infirm, elderly are being assassinated from the skies. And this is like a daily occurrence. With U.S. military assistance, the Saudi military has blockaded all Yemeni ports, meaning that food cannot get in and children are dying en masse from complications of malnutrition. And now, Yemen has been struck by an horrific epidemic of cholera, possibly weaponized, which has been one of the worst documented epidemics in recent history. And yeah, I'm sure the financial windfall for the British defense industry has been just massive. But at what cost to the soul of Great Britain? You know, this is the country, Mike, that gave the world the Magna Carta. So, Michael Fallon, I will ask, if no one else will, how does it feel to be in collusion with Saudi Arabia in war crimes in Yemen and financially hitched at the hip with the butcher of Yemen, Prince Salman? I'm just saying.
Well, obviously he's comfortable with it.
Yeah.
You know, he looks at his stock portfolio statement, his brokerage statement, and says, yeah, I'm doing great.
Yeah. Well, the people of Yemen are doing very lousily.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's not just British arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Back before the fall of the Shah, the U.S. was selling F-14s to, I'm sorry, not the fall of the Shah, but the U.S. has sold F-14s to Saudi Arabia.
Right, right.
And it still forms the mainstay of their air assets. So, yeah, U.S. warplanes are being used to commit these war crimes in Yemen.
And I, frankly, do not feel very comfortable being a citizen of a government colluding in war crimes. That does not make me feel morally right or morally comfortable one little bit.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah,
me neither.
Then I have to turn to something a little bit lighter. From the Department of the U.S., you can't really make this stuff up. Thousands to scream helplessly at the sky to mark the anniversary of the Trump presidency. Thousands of Americans, angered and disappointed by President Trump's ascension to the White House, plan to vent their frustration by screaming helplessly at the sky on the anniversary of the 2016 presidential election. And apparently more than 2,200 people have already indicated their interest in attending the New York City rally, according to the Scream Helplessly at the Sky on the Anniversary of the Election Facebook page. Coordinator Nathan Wall said the group's schedule would also include a moment of silence before a mournful rendition of Kumbaya on an auto harp, because we're all just a bunch of liberal stereotypes. Now, Mike, I'm sorry, but is this the darn best these people can do in response to a legitimately elected president because their candidate didn't win?
Well, I hope that's all that they do, but don't forget, this is only a few days after Antifa is saying we're going to start a civil war and we're going to get Trump and Pence out of the White House, and they're not saying who they intend to replace him with, but we know Hillary's, you know, despite her claim she's never going to run for the White House again, it sure looks like she's already campaigning, doesn't it?
She's jockeying for position for something. I just don't know what that something is. And if this is in fact the case, this country is in horrible trouble, big time, because there are two things which self-actualized successful people never do. They do not blame, and they do not play the victim card. They figure out what the heck went wrong and move to correct it, so that the next time they make an effort to do something, that effort goes off successfully. Well,
unfortunately, Hillary and most of the liberals in general are incapable of looking at themselves objectively. They have this fantasy world that they've constructed, and they think everybody should just sort of want to live in that world that they've come up with, and most of us don't. And, I mean, Hillary's book is an embarrassment. I'm amazed that people are buying it, because it's just, you know, a continuation of the screed that began on the morning after the election, where it's everybody's fault but mine. It's Russia's fault. It was, you know, the FBI's fault. It was James Comey's fault. And the fact of the matter is, we just didn't like Hillary Clinton. And we didn't trust her in the Oval Office because of Chinagate, Bloodgate, Travelgate, murder of Vince Foster, murder of all those people, the Bimbo Eruption Squad, Whitewater, Castle Grande, Flowerwood, and on and on and on and on. That's why she lost the election. That's why she couldn't steal the election.
Right. And what the Democrats did, and they're going to have to pull back and ultimately own it if they are ever going to have a chance for the White House again. What they did was to steal the primaries from Bernie Sanders, who could have actually energized the base and won, and devised ways to massively rig the votes in favor of the unchosen one. Then they attempted to force Debbie Wasserman Schultz, candidate of choice, Hillary Clinton, down the throats of the American people, who rejected her outright. And the reasons are very clear. She was utterly pathologically incapable of relating to the middle-class base and had more baggage than does Kim Kardashian on a photo shoot. Unhappy that it was the Electoral College which ultimately worked in favor of electing President Trump, start canvassing to create a federal law which abolishes the institution. But, Mike, I've got to tell you, the Scream Helplessly at the Sky movement only reinforces the aura of victimhood and blame these people exude and does absolutely nothing positive or substantial to cure the problem, which would have been to have a legitimate candidate who does relate to middle-class voters and can energize them.
Yeah,
so,
but they can't find any of those among the narcocracy. And the goal here is beginning to emerge. The reason they were shoving Hillary down our throats was they had all been engaging in this massive corruption.
Mm-hmm.
And they understood that unless they got Hillary into the Oval Office, they would be dealing with investigations, indictments, charges, possible jail time, which is now starting to happen.
Oh, yes.
And as far as the screaming at the sky moment here, I think it would be wonderful if, they say they're going to have 2,000 people show up and scream at the sky. I think it would be funny to have like 5,000 show up surrounding them and just pointing and laughing while they're doing it. Look at those people, they're screaming at the sky. Oh, my God, it's so embarrassing.
So I would like to talk to Democrats. And, hey, Tom Perez, I'm going to call you out specifically. I have just the candidate for you for 2020. And if you collectively, and the Democrats around you, have half a brain, you should start courting her now. Her name is Representative for the state of Hawaii, Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi is a quadruple threat. She is a veteran woman, a minority of Samoan European ancestry, and a powerful voice for peace, moderation, and moral negotiations. But, of course, being just as owned as are your Republican colleagues by the merchants of death and the wonderful contributions they make to your individual candidates and parties, you just don't have the male attributes to do this. Do you, Tom?
No, from now on, until we bring down that narcocracy, every single candidate we are presented will be part of that corrupt structure. They'll never allow anybody, especially after the disaster of last year.
Yep.
I mean, look how hard they worked to, first of all, deny Donald Trump the nomination and then deny him the White House. Okay, they're never going to let it get that close again. Anybody who is not part of the narcocracy, anybody who's not fully on board with this idea of U.S. government-sanctioned drug sales to your children and the profiting thereby is not going to be allowed to even be on the ballot.
Yeah. I'd like to go over to economy right now, and this comes to us from Zero Hedge, which, if you haven't checked it out, is a very sober and intelligent blog. I recommend it highly. Apparently, CVS is in talks to buy Aetna in what could be the year's largest deal. And in a stunning scoop published minutes before the close, Wall Street Journal reported that CVS Health is in talks to buy Aetna, a defensive acquisition that may help the company fend off Amazon should the e-commerce follow through on flirtations with the pharmacy business. And apparently shortly before this was published, CVS and other pharmacy stocks tumbled to their lows of the day on reports that Amazon has been quietly obtaining wholesale pharmacy licenses.
Yeah, I've been hearing that.
Now, the big question I have to ask, in terms of allowing this acquisition to take place, is what, Mike, do you think are going to be the effects on patient care?
Well, unfortunately, we've already seen in the case of some of these large monolithic pharmacies, they're not very careful where they're getting their drugs, and there's been a big problem with counterfeit drugs making their way onto the pharmacies of the United States of America. And it is a problem where you'll get medications that don't actually have as much of the real medication as they're supposed to. There have been cases of these pills being made with fillers that are really not safe to use, binders, the chemicals that make them into a pill. And so quality control and quality of service is definitely going down. One of the complaints I have against our local CVS is that they don't carry the wide selection of products that they used to when it was still back in its previous owners. Now it's just a lot of just a very few things. It's the same trend we're seeing in the supermarkets, and especially when you're dealing with your health issue and you know the things that are going to work and you want to get them. It's very frustrating when all of a sudden these big corporations come on in and all of a sudden I'm getting complaints from the listeners.
Oh, dear. Sorry.
Okay, there we are. All of a sudden, the quality of service, the selection goes down, and it's all about more profit. And unfortunately, by allowing monopolies to take root, quality of service, quality of product is going to go down. Cost to the consumer is going to go up. That's why there used to be laws in this country to guarantee there would be competition, to guarantee the best service and the best product to the customer at the lowest price. Mm-hmm. But as we descend into fascism, competition is now verboten across the Reich. And that's kind of where we are. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking with concern at how Amazon is really just buying up all kinds of things. And yes, I'd heard from another source that they're buying up pharmacy licenses. They want to have the Amazon pharmacies. They want to be the new superstore.
Yeah. I'd like to look at a situation planned for next month. A U.S. official has said that 3 Navy carriers plan to exercise in Asia Pacific at about the same time that President Trump is traveling to Beijing, including visits to South Korea and China. During a Pentagon briefing, Lieutenant General Kenneth McKenzie, director of the Joint Staff, raised the prospect of the 3 carriers operating together at some point, but he provided no details. A U.S. official confirmed the plans for an exercise, but wasn't able to discuss the matter publicly, so spoke on conditions of anonymity. Mike, what are they thinking here? What's going on?
Well, this stands in stark contrast to Mattis out there saying we're seeking a peaceful solution in North Korea. It certainly doesn't look like it.
Yeah.
I can understand just from a flat-out training perspective, especially in light of the poor performance shown by the command crews of the Fitzgerald and the John S. McCain, that maybe they do want to start exercising multi-carrier operations. The normal mode for the carrier group, so far as we fight little tiny helpless nations unable to defend themselves, is the carrier operates as its own autonomous platform with its fleet auxiliaries, and it's the center of a battle group.
Right.
The idea of having battle groups comprised of 2 or more carriers working together, that's something that hasn't really been done since World War II. And it may be that they're working to sort of figure out how they would coordinate between these 3 overlapping aircraft control zones, and coordinating between the launching and recovery of aircraft. It certainly would make that overhead space very, very complex and difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
But the reason for exercising this kind of an approach is somebody's getting ready to go up against a major foe where they feel that this kind of force concentration is necessary.
Now, my bet, Mike, is that while President Trump is in Beijing for meetings with Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un is going to cool his jets, not test any missiles, and absolutely do nothing in response to the provocative military exercises surrounding the Korean Peninsula. What worries me, though, is if there is no response to the occupied, unhinged surveillance state of America's move, such a response may well be crafted for Kim Jong-un by way of a false flag. I mean, false flags are a routine tool of statescraft by this country. And the timing of the coming together of these carrier groups needs to have a substantive reason for doing it. I mean, keeping operational preparedness at peak level takes a lot of time, discipline, and money, right?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And again, having all 3 aircraft carriers together at that exercise provides an optimum time for a coordinated attack into North Korea and an attempted decapitation strike. But again, that's why we were talking about the revelation or the confirmation in the released JFK documents that, yes, the U.S. government will stage atrocities to justify wars, and we have to be ready for the reality that they may do one to get us into North Korea or Iran.
at a time when President Trump is the guest of China? You know?
Yeah.
That, forgive me, but geopolitically, that sounds more than a little dicey.
It is very, very dicey.
Yeah.
But again, up in Beijing, it's not like North Korea could realistically reach him there. And
No.
Okay, so we're going to take a break for commercials here.
Mm-hmm.
And when we come on back, we're going to be talking more about Trump and whatever else he's doing this week. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Claire, take it away.
Yeah, I read something today that was extremely disturbing. President Trump's new presidential memo will normalize drones in America's life. And he recently made some decisions on drone aircraft, which foreshadows the increase of technology in civilian, police, and military strategy. On Wednesday, President Trump signed a presidential memorandum creating a new trial program for the commercial use of unmanned aerial aircraft or drones. The memo, titled Unmanned Aircraft Systems Integration Pilot Program, allows certain communities to be exempt from current safety rules as they test drone operations. States, communities, and tribes selected to participate would devise their own trial programs in partnership with government and industry drone users. The administration anticipates approving at least 5 applications, but there is no limit on the number of communities that can join. And I have an observation to that. For the people who believe, I think wrongly, that drone strikes are only going to happen against the bad guys in other countries, you'd better rethink that, because police departments around the countries are already starting to stock up on these weapons for their arsenals. Connecticut, set to become the first state to allow deadly police drones. And a lawmaker said weaponized drones now legal in the U.S. A lawmaker says crime fighting will be a video game. Cops may quell the next Baltimore-like uprising with tear gas rounds. And the problems with using these are both moral and legal, I think. And I'd like your input on this with the use of these weaponized drones. And they're very complex. First, how much collateral damage, Mike, are these going to create among innocent U.S. civilians? If incidents like those in Afghanistan, Yemen, Iraq, Somalia, and Libya are any indication, the amounts of collateral damage in the use of these weaponized drones can be very huge.
Well, we're getting into an apples and oranges kind of situation because the drones that you're talking about in the war zone are like the Reapers and the Predators. Yeah. Those carry tremendously powerful explosives and munitions. What they're talking about here in the U.S., at least at this point, are drones that are carrying maybe a live shotgun shell, what's called a beanbag shell, or there's actually a fireable taser, that fits in a 12-gauge cartridge, and when you fire it, it charges, and when it hits its target, it knocks it down. Certainly tear gas, various other area denial dispersants can be used, but the possibility for collateral damage, it's real. It's probably not as great, but it's definitely going to be real. The real issue, I think, for a lot of people is this idea of the fact that the safety regulations are being set aside, meaning that in testing out these drone applications, we can expect these drones to be falling out of the sky, which they do, damaging property, injuring people, possibly causing traffic accidents. We know that small birds that get caught up in these drones get chopped to little tiny bits, which also destroys the drone at the same time. And there is that privacy issue, especially in the hands of law enforcement, because these drones carry very sophisticated cameras. Even the consumer drones now have very excellent high-definition cameras that are very low-light sensitive. And it opens up the possibility of just peeking through the windows. And I don't know if you remember the movie Blue Thunder, which was Roy Scheider, about this experimental police helicopter. Well, I think a lot of the issues that were raised in that movie still apply, the only difference being that the drones don't have a human pilot that has a sense of moral conscience about what's going on.
Well, what bothers me, I think, is secondly, it moves the drone operator from a position of helping cops on the ground apprehend a suspicious baddie to occasionally that of judge, jury, and executioner, which is the absolute polar opposite of due process.
I would agree with you on that one.
Yeah,
and, of course, we have too many police acting like judge, jury, and executioner on the ground right now. It's a wildly out-of-control problem. And I think the drones are only going to make it worse. And I think that you might actually see there to be an underground pushback against the drones, either by very crude weapons to take them down, or maybe bring back the art of falconeering.
Ah, yes.
You know,
yes.
You, Peregrine, kill drone. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials.
Okay.
We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we were just watching on Fox News during the break here. They're finally starting to address an issue that we've been talking about for many years, and that is the fact that the Social Security Trust Fund is in trouble. Expenditures for the rising number of baby boomer retirements have now crossed $1 trillion. They're looking at a forecast of over $30 trillion in liabilities they have coming up. And they're now predicting that Social Security is probably going to be insolvent by 2034. What they're not telling you is how this all came about.
Oh, I remember.
And this, again, goes back to the presidency of Bill Clinton. And it was a big, big stink, because back before Clinton became president, the administrators of Social Security and the guardians of the budget understood there was a demographic problem coming on up with the retirement of the baby boomers, that post-war surge in population. I'm one of them, so is she. And they were all going to be retiring at the same time, and it was going to put a huge strain on the Social Security fund. So they approved an increase in Social Security contributions, taxes, what have you, from payroll deduction. And they started to build up a huge cash surplus to absorb that surge in retirements that were expected from the baby boomers. So far, so good. Then Bill Clinton gets into the office, and he looks at all that money sitting over there in the Social Security Trust Fund, and he borrows it, takes it, spends it as general revenues, replaces it with a special issue treasury bond which cannot be redeemed. And that's where he got his magic federal budget surplus that the Democrats like to crow about. Oh, he had this wonderful federal budget surplus. You know, I did a good thing. I took a federal deficit. I turned it into a positive. It was the economy, stupid. And what he did was he literally was embezzling the American worker, because that money in the Social Security Trust Fund does not belong to the government. It belongs to you, the American worker. And in point of fact, you are forced to entrust that money to the government for wise management, and clearly the government has let you down on that one. In a way, the U.S. government is already in a state of economic default, but they strategically defaulted against the American worker, knowing that we can't affect the government's credit rating, we can't repossess, we can't do anything like that. And now the corporate media is finally saying, yeah, there's a problem. Social Security is going to be gone by 2034. Well, that's okay. We'll just start pouring into the private retirement accounts and the 401ks. Congress just put a limit on those. Congress has now put a limit on how much you can contribute to a 401k. They want all the money, even the retirement money. George Carlin predicted it in one of his last shows. He said, they want it all. Now they want your retirement money back.
That reminds me, George Carlin was not only a very funny man, he was a prophet on a lot of issues.
Yes.
And it's no wonder that the establishment pushed so hard back against him for what he had to say and what his fans loved hearing him say, because they knew that the guy was telling the truth.
Absolutely. Yeah. He had a way of using humor to get his point across. And, you know, as he got on later in life and he wasn't really interested or worried about the money, he would use his platform to get on out there and try and sound the warning about what was going on with this country, the war agenda, the environmentalists, and ultimately the crimes and predations of the money junkies.
Yeah. I'd like to take a little leap back over to Africa right now. In the blog antiwar.com, again, something I suggest you might want to take a look at. Very good reporting there. It's not just Niger. The U.S. military activity is a recruiting tool for terrorist groups across West Africa. And if you take a look at the numbers, Mike, they are absolutely staggering. In truth, U.S. forces are already deployed all across Africa by the thousands. and that's thousands, okay? 6,000 troops are on the continent, conducting 3,500 exercises, programs, and engagements every year. That's almost 10 missions a day from Cameroon to Somalia, Djibouti to Libya. More of the 800 of these forces, Pentagon spokesman Major Audricia Harris told The Intercept, are deployed to Niger. This is up from approximately 100 troops sent in 2013 to carry out drone reconnaissance missions, making the hardscrabble country, wedged between 7 nations, including Mali, Libya, Nigeria, and Chad, the largest concentration of U.S. military forces in West Africa.
Well, Niger is now admitted to be the hub of U.S. military operations in West Africa. We don't know where the other hubs are. But Ron Paul is out there saying basically the U.S. is militarily occupying 53 out of 54 African nations.
Yeah. And there was an analyst who made the observation the rapid, largely unrecognized increase in U.S. troops in Niger is part of the large expansion of the U.S. military footprint in Africa, says William Hartog. He is the director of Arms and Security Project at the Center for International Policy. This expansion is long overdue for congressional scrutiny and public discussion. U.S. efforts primarily focused on training allies and proxies are flawed, often ineffective, and can have destabilizing effects on countries where the military operations are meant to strengthen them. According to experts, cast as benign training operations, they can lead to unforeseen consequences and dangerous blowback. While the Pentagon likes to downplay the military aspects of these missions, in a number of instances, they have evolved into acts of war that risk getting the U.S. involved in broader conflicts, even as they have little impact on the spread of terrorism. And while 800-plus troops are in Niger, many more soldiers rotated through the country, as U.S. forces have been, according to Dunford, carrying out intermittent missions for 20 years. Who knew? 20 years? Mm-hmm. Hello. And I was a little shocked yesterday by President Trump's admission. He had no idea this was going on. Not a one, which means that all of his, and in business you need to delegate. You need to bring the appropriate task to the appropriate person. But where that can really mess you up geopolitically is if you have people acting autonomously. You can literally have one of those generals plunge us into war before President Trump has the chance to stop it.
That's absolutely the danger here.
That scares me.
First of all, under the Constitution, only Congress can declare a war.
Yeah.
Under the War Powers Act, the president can declare a war, but for Donald Trump to simply arbitrarily say, I'm going to let the Pentagon generals run this, that is absolutely not the way it's supposed to work.
No.
We're supposed to have a civilian leadership, civilian oversight of the military, not a military junta running the wars for us with Congress and the president just out there for set decoration.
Yeah.
Because that's what it looks like they are right now in terms of the war agenda. Congress was completely unaware of what was going on in Africa.
Yeah.
Trump was caught completely unaware. He's trying to basically get out of it, saying, well, I rely on the generals, to figure out what's best. But he's not allowed to do that. Trump is not allowed to delegate the creation of wars onto the Pentagon any more than Congress was allowed to dump their war authorization authority onto the president.
Yeah, and in looking at this and realizing that when we have these drone strikes overseas in places like Africa, what happens to the people left standing is they're angry, and they've got nothing much left to lose other than their lives, which doesn't mean a whole lot right at that point. No wonder these people are getting radicalized. It creates an energy of perpetual war by radicalizing indigenous Africans.
Well, that's what the U.S. wants, is to stir perpetual war so that all of the people who are living over the oil and the gas and the uranium kill each other off and save us the trouble. Nobody gets up in the morning one day and says, there's nothing on TV. I think I'm going to be a terrorist.
No, it doesn't happen that way.
Yeah. Somebody gets radicalized because they're just going about their business in their village market square, and they're talking to friends, and they're buying and selling and doing whatever, and all of a sudden there's a horrendous blast, and people that they've known their entire lives are just lying in bloody shreds all around them, and the shrapnel is stamped made in the USA. That's why they hate us. They don't hate us for our freedoms.
I hear you.
They hate us because the U.S. government has a bad habit of going into other countries and mucking about with them.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of mucking about, T-Rex, Rex Tillerson, a.k.a., has come out again and said Assad can have no rule in Syria's future. With the Assad government in Syria cementing increasingly secure, in control over much of the country, the U.S. has quieted down for a while on demands that Assad's ouster, instead shifting the blame to Iran and Russia. Now,
For Assad's survival.
Yes, for Assad's survival. Secretary of State Tillerson, however, now says that with Geneva talks coming up in late November, Assad has to be removed from power, and that the only way to end the Syrian war is for the world to accept a whole and unified Syria with no role for Bashar al-Assad. Now, exactly how the U.S. intends to see this through, as the end result is unclear, as while there are some nations that have backed the U.S. calls for regime change, the non-jihadist rebel groups are virtually wiped out at this point, and such groups have no chance of seizing the country by force. And so I want to ask T-Rex just how he intends to accomplish this, and by the way, has Vlad the non-impaler received the memo yet?
No, they're not going to inform Russia. I mean, the only way the U.S. can absolutely guarantee that Assad will not be part of the future Syria is to assassinate Assad.
How likely do you think that would be, considering that he has...
Leaders get assassinated all the time.
Yeah.
You know, they could do it with a cruise missile strike.
Yeah, okay. And then what is Russia going to do in reprisal?
I don't think Russia would declare war on the U.S. over the assassination of Assad.
What do you think they would do?
I think they would file a formal complaint with the UN, which is a pointless exercise.
Yeah.
But again, Russia doesn't really want war, neither does China, neither do any of these countries.
Yeah.
It's the U.S. that is pushing all these wars on everybody. And at some point, though, we're going to reach a point where the rest of the world is going to say, okay, appeasement didn't work. We should have learned that the first time around. It's time for us to link up and start seriously looking at dealing with this latest empire.
Yeah. And in a related move, we find the following article. Tillerson also says that Iraq must resist Iran influence, stand on its own in the face of Iranian influence, while recognizing that the two states share a long border and legitimate economic interests. And Iran has been very helpful in Iraq getting rid of the jihadists. Tillerson, who held talks with Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi in Baghdad this week, was asked by reporters in Geneva about blunting Iran's influence. What we are saying to the Iraqis is you must develop the capacity to stand on your own. Now, this makes absolutely no sense to me.
No, it doesn't. I mean, Iraq is already telling the U.S. forces they're the ones who need to leave. Iran was invited in to help deal with this Kurdish Peshmerga.
Yeah.
Okay, so Iran is in Iraq at the invitation of the Iraqi government.
Yeah.
And the U.S. is not. And now you have, with Iraq just about ready to finish off ISIS there, and Syria finishing off ISIS there, it's understandable they're all saying, it's time for the U.S. to take your forces and go home. You are not wanted here. You are not welcome here.
Right. I'm having to wonder when Muqtada al-Sadr, remember that guy?
I remember him.
Yeah. He was the guy who originally said on the SOFA agreement that the U.S. had to be out of Iraq by the time they said they were going to be out of Iraq, or else.
Yes.
I have to wonder what he's doing, what he's planning, what his long-term plans are. I have a feeling he could get that Mahdi army back together just in a heartbeat. He knows all the senior commanders, and I have to wonder and I have to speculate as to whether this is where things are going in Iraq. Mike, what do you think?
Well, again, the U.S. is losing control and influence over Iraq. In fact, Iraq is not only pivoting closer to Iran, it's pivoting closer to Russia.
Yeah.
This whole Middle Eastern deal, it's turned into a quagmire. And again, Pakistan said it best. There is no way the U.S. is going to militarily prevail in Afghanistan. It's time to seek a political solution and an exit strategy.
Right.
The U.S. is basically lost in Syria, despite all this talk about we got to get rid of Assad and everything.
Yep.
The U.S. is losing in Iraq because Iraq is turning away. All these countries are saying, thank you for all the landmines. It's time for you to get on out.
Yeah.
And everything the U.S. has been doing in that part of the world is driving these countries to pivot away from the West and toward Russia and China. It is a epic, monumental failure. If we are already in the opening throes of World War III, we are already losing it.
Yeah. And speaking of monumental failure, the House just passed a new missile sanctions against Iran. In a 423-2 vote, the U.S. House of Representatives has passed the Iran Ballistic Missiles and International Sanctions Enforcement Act, which intends to impose sanctions of the Iranian government as well as international entities that are determined by the president to support Iran, whatever the heck that means. The resolution isn't specifically related to Iran's nuclear deal, though Representative Ed Royce, the bill's sponsor, presented it, and several other anti-Iranian resolutions making their way through the House as proof Congress is responding to the full range of threats from Iran. Threats? What threats?
Well, I'll tell you the one that really bothers me, a very disingenuous title. They're calling it the Iran Ballistic Missiles and International Sanctions Enforcement Act.
Yeah.
There are no international sanctions on Iran's missile program.
Yeah.
And again, like any other nation, they have a legitimate right to build defensive weapons in advance of a clearly belligerent, aggressive United States.
Yeah.
And what the U.S. is trying to do is bluff all these countries into disarmament on the promise that they won't be invaded. Then they invade. And the U.S. has gone back on that so many times, nobody's going to buy it. They did it with Libya. They said, Libya, if you surrender your nuclear weapons program, we won't invade you. Then they invaded.
Yeah.
Same thing with Syria. Surrender your chemical weapons, we won't invade you. Syria surrendered the chemical weapons, they got invaded. Same thing with Iraq. Surrender your chemical weapons, we won't invade you. Iraq surrendered their chemical weapons, they got invaded.
Yeah.
At this point, who in their right mind is going to surrender a potentially defensive weapon system on the assurance that the United States is not going to invade? I think the leaders of Iraq and Iran were getting together and saying, you can't trust the United States government. Their word is worthless.
Yeah, and you have to look at the way that President Trump has distanced himself from the P5+1. I mean, that is completely, totally insane.
Well, it's what Israel wants.
Yeah.
Israel wants the U.S. to smash Iran up, bomb it back to the Stone Age the way we did to Iraq, so that Israel can continue to be the major political influence in the region. Again, Israel doesn't want to fight its own wars. Their children are precious. Our children are disposable. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Last segment of our Pauhana Friday program. And, boy, Skype is really not doing very well today. We got a lot of noise, a lot of compression artifacts. Claire, what is your next story?
I think we should have this as an ongoing Friday segment. And this should be called Rats Leaving the Sinking Democratic Ship.
Yes.
Former CIA Director Leon Panetta said that the Senate Intelligence Committee is going to have to look into the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee for funding the controversial Trump dossier during an interview on Thursday. CNN's Wolf Blitzer asked Panetta how it was possible that neither the chair of the DNC and the Clinton campaign knew about payments for the dossier. And Panetta responded, "It's obviously something that the Intelligence Committee is going to have to look at. You know, knowing presidential campaigns, they're big operations. And somehow the left hand may not know what the right hand is doing, and that could be the case here." Panetta continued, "I really do think that the committee is going to have to get into this, determine exactly what happened, and find out who knew what and when." Blitzer followed up by asking Panetta why Clinton campaign attorney Mark Elias didn't tell Clinton campaign chair John Podesta they had paid for the dossier. Elias was
now there's a problem there.
Yeah.
There's a problem there because there's now an FEC complaint against the Clinton campaign because the money that was paid for this dossier was listed on campaign funding records as a completely different purpose. So somebody knew what the money really had gone for and they were trying to conceal it. Somebody inside the campaign itself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's definitely a smoking gun. And we know what a control freak Hillary Clinton was. There is no way that anything that significant was happening inside her campaign that she was not aware of. Okay? Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, John McCain is up to his neck in this.
Yeah.
McCain was the one who took this bogus fabricated document and gave it to the FBI to get the FBI to start the investigation into Donald Trump and Russia. It was all bogus from beginning to end.
Yep.
It's a complete fraud.
Yeah, it appears with Panetta having sort of distanced himself in the way that he was talking about Clinton and the campaign and the DNC, he's sort of pushing that way against this whole thing.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are doing that one.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, he's trying to also set the stage for claiming that neither Debbie Wasserman Schultz or Hillary Clinton personally knew that this was going on. And that really is, I think, a ridiculous statement to make.
Yeah.
We're talking about a significant amount of money, $8 million.
Yeah, that's not chump change.
Yeah, that's not something that you delegate to a subordinate, especially somebody who's going on out and conducting opposition research. So I'm not buying it that Hillary or Debbie were not perfectly aware of what was going on.
And I think that there are going to be some bombshells in the release, ultimately, of the banking transactions.
There's going to be that, plus what this FBI informant now has to say. This is not going to go away.
Nope.
And we're going to use this to rip open all the Clinton scandals all the way back to Arkansas in the mid-1980s. All right, there's our music. Time for us to get on out of here and have a relaxing, we hope, weekend.
Yeah, and do listen to John Stedmiller coming on next.
Yes, absolutely. He's got lots of fun things to share with you. So we'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.